Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Matej Rafael Risko, who is a junior research fellow at the ADAPT Institute in Bratislava. Welcome, Matej.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you that you have found time for this conversation. And you are an expert in questions of deterrence, of how to prevent your potential adversary or current adversary from attacking you or doing bad things, which would force you practically to go into fight when you don't want to fight, but you want that your adversary doesn't do it to you. So what are the primary objectives in this complicated game, this complicated strategy to deter your adversary?
I would say to prevent aggression first and foremost, and to prevent the nuclear use. I will be talking a lot of from the point of view of how NATO views the things, and our fundamental purpose is to preserve peace and to prevent coercion and deter the aggression, however kind of it. The purpose of nuclear deterrence since basically 1949 was to deter the aggression. It should be said that the theory has evolved through times, and the practice has evolved through times. First and foremost, what should be said that let's say we had a massive retaliation practice and theory in the beginning. Basically, in 1957, the NATO adopted massive retaliation, and this has changed. We can go deep into it, but to answer your question, is the primary purpose of deterrence is to deter aggression and to preserve peace via military means. Nuclear and non-nuclear, which means nuclear weapons and non-nuclear strategic weapons, armies, strategies, relative size of the armies, and so on and so on.
And what are the biggest challenges when developing deterrent strategies?
Deterrence basically reacts in time on what adversaries doing, reacts on technologies and development as such. It's basically a very sort of reactive thinking, in a sense, how to prevent the next war, how to employ weapons in the next war. It's basically thinking about how to fight the war, how to retaliate for not doing it. So for the purpose of not doing it. So I would say in the current situation, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the changes of the NATO's nuclear strategy and posture, because we are in a completely different situation than we were in during the Cold War. During Cold War, NATO was basically conventionally inferior to USSR. Now it's other way around. Russia is conventionally inferior to NATO. And NATO was basically thinking about the first use to deter Russia during the Cold War. There are various strategies. The most important one was the flexible response, basically, which means, flexible response is about gaining superiority or being able to act at various levels of conflict. And this has changed quite dramatically. Since 1991, NATO adopted a so-called reduced reliance on nuclear weapons status or posture, and that has changed again in 2022. But we don't have this muscle memory, right? As one American administration member said, like just a few days ago, because we were basically in this situation. From the point of view of deterrence as a theory and as a practice, as Russia is now. So we are trying to adapt to this new situation. I can say we did a lot for the last 3 years. For example, like NATO Steadfast Noon exercise, which is a NATO nuclear exercise, never been public. It was it was like highly classified. Of course, there was a knowledge there's something like that, but it was really classified. And now we are really open about what we are doing. So it's a sort of a signaling towards Russia, also towards China to a less extent. But it's a sort of a change that happened since basically the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Um, Also, a friend of mine was in the Washington summit, and the observation from it was that we, as an alliance, are really coherent about our nuclear posture, and that we are a nuclear alliance, and we basically need to communicate this to people in the countries, and that's not an easy task, right? Because we basically abandoned the issue in the public domain for nearly 3 decades, right? Um, so I think that these are challenges. I'm not sure what's like the main challenge. I mean, there are many of them, and it's focused around the crux of the issue, which is that we are changing our approach to Russia. Also the conventional one, right?
And that shows that the whole discussion about nuclear deterrence is also a discussion about how do we understand what our adversary would do, what they will, how they will interpret. That's practically the basics of game theory. You do not know, like the whole information is open, but you don't know how your adversary interprets information and what is his ideas, but you can calculate the profit which they get from any step, and based on that you calculate your strategies. The question is, of course, if you are, if it's not like the matrix in the mathematic task when you see the numbers and you can calculate the percentage of the result, but when it's about nations who have their different structures, and they have their economy, they have their military, they have their interest, and you don't know always everything what they have in their arsenal. The situation gets more complicated. How much of OSINT methods of analyzing sources, which practically our adversary Volens Nolens provide us with in their communication, in their decisions, in their movement of their troops, how much of OSINT how big is the role of OSINT in development of our deterrent strategies?
I'm sure that like within 50 years, when some materials are declassified, we find in daily intro briefs a lot of oryx stuff or so. And of course, and also, or gaining information from open sources is a significant portion of what our ICs do. However, in the level of nuclear deterrence, you have some very clear source of information through verifiable measures, arms control agreements, and so on. And of course, the methods used by OSINT analysts on a government or civil level, that doesn't really matter, like satellite images and gaining information from it, and so on. However, still, I do think that in the deterrence strategies and deterrence is such that the main source of information is the one that is classified. So basically, this human intelligence for, or I don't know, signal intelligence is very important. Um, so I don't think that OSINT is particularly so helpful for deterrence as such. But it is very helpful for understanding what's happening other way around. Like for example, during conflicts, right? Um, in Ukraine, we have many great OSINT analysts, but it needs to be added that OSINT, I mean, open source intelligence. So it's also an analysis. It's not just about like gaining information, because this information can be misleading or incomplete or so. Um, but and it's about it's up to analysts to distinguish which information is correct. I or basically this, right? Um, but I do not think that in deterrence strategies also is much helpful. But it's really helpful for things like verifying where the subs are, which units move where, and so on, right? On that stuff. But this is just a part of the issue. I think human intelligence and signal intelligence are maybe more important in that very regards.
Indeed, and we know also that the development of this approach, it comes from the very top, when on the political level, when a lot of information has been gathered and analyzed and forged into very clear political statements and decisions of a general character, but with endless consequences. And one of such decisions was the decision in 2008 not to invite Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, not to provide them with the plan of joining the NATO. And many say that, and I also share this point of view, that that decision effectively led to both aggression of Russia against Georgia and later aggression of Russia against Ukraine, despite the fact that most probably for many Western politicians, for Angela Merkel, for example, Chancellor of Germany, that decision had to lead to quite different, quite opposite results, to more peace in Europe. Where was the calculation? Where has it been done wrong when Ukraine and NATO was not invited, which led to that result?
It's a largely technical question, right? NATO is a military alliance, and as such, must be able to defend its members. And these states were in a condition to provide the sufficient defense for themselves. And I believe there weren't really other allies that would agree with that, or that wasn't an actual capability to do that, or and will, which is the most important thing. Yeah, I do agree with that this decision could lead to believe on the Russian side that NATO won't react, and it does make the invasion more likely. That's undoubtedly true, but I'm not sure it was possible actually these days to join NATO as time. Um, I mean, many people don't understand. For example, 2% of GDP isn't that important measure, and but much more important measures are, for example, how many divisions, how many force structures, units you have, etc. And these, I mean, actual measures were always considered to be much more important. And I mean, on the very internal level, because this 2% is a political metrics, right? And it works as a political metrics because it's easily translatable to the public sphere. So we should spend this amount of money to our defense. I mean, that's something everyone can understand. However, on the very technical level, or how the NATO actually works, it's about it's not only about money, right? You can spend this money on, for example, a military hospital, or salaries, or also. And okay, you say, okay, we now spend like 2% of our GDP, but that actually didn't help that much to defense. And from that very technical reasons, it wasn't really possible these states to join NATO. The way NATO would be like self-defensible alliance, and properly, because if NATO has to be really credible, in that NATO is able to defend itself, it must be possible to do that, right? And I'm not sure, and I don't think I'm the only one who share this opinion. Ukraine and Georgia were in a condition to do that. And also from other reasons. I mean, both states, and it's a shame to say, but both states were quite infiltrated by Russian spy agencies, for example. It's a complex process to integrate the state within the military alliance. It's not easy, even in a current 32 states at multilateral level. And that was what actually happened in 2008. It was like, okay, we have open door policy. Yeah, it's still the issue, but at the time it was like, we can we are open you to join us, but it's actually not time, not the right time. But you can join in the future. And yes, from the higher perspective, it can lead to the Russian belief that NATO won't be defend this country, or has no interest in defend them. I mean, that's true, but also it's true that it wasn't really possible.
While with the position that countries which are infiltrated by the Russian agencies should not be a member of NATO, we should kick out Hungary out of NATO and most probably large parts of Germany. But of course,
Actually, this solved. I mean, there was a real cutoffs of intel sharing. I mean, that's
indeed,
actual reality within the alliance.
indeed, and so this is a complex problem, as you have brilliantly described. But when we go one step further, you've already mentioned the Baltic states, which are totally dependent on NATO in a case of possible Russia aggression, just because they don't have strategic depth for their defeat. How much of deterrence does NATO present in this region when the countries are already NATO members? But many politicians from the countries which I met personally said that in private conversations that they are still not quite convinced that NATO will invest all their resources and all their power into their protection. Of course, there are good signs with the Bundeswehr brigade in the region and with other commitment. That how much plausible is this NATO commitment towards the Baltic countries in the eyes of Russian aggressors?
Well, NATO deployed these brigades, or basically enhanced foreign presence. It was elevated to a brigade level, basically quite recently, um, to these countries as a form of a tribal strategy. So that means that if Russia invades, I don't know, Estonia, or even like all of the three countries at the same time, these brigades or military formations in Baltics would be exposed to the direct military threat, and that means like killing of foreign soldiers. Basically, democracies usually don't like when some country kill their soldiers or the people, for that matter. Um, so that's the sort of the way how to solve that problem. However, I never encounter actually an actual distrust in a military level, or the very technical of senior official level. But yeah, of course, it's true that these. This problem with trust is there, and it's the issue like since the beginning of NATO, right? Um, uh, um, I mean, it's that very well known. Is the US willing to trade, for example, New York, Washington, whatever, for Paris or Moscow, or Berlin in response to Moscow? Um, well, the actual answer is we don't know. To be rigorous, I mean scientifically rigorous, but everything suggests that it is actually, or it has been for a long time, and always been an issue. How would actual employment look like? That's a different question, right? Because for a long time, and that was the actual concern, I know in the alliance, is that it's quite difficult to defend Baltic states from a limited or Yeah, basically limited scenarios when using also nuclear arsenal for coercion and so on. So that was basically changed in posture, in conventional posture, in the area in 2016 or 2019, when these countries and NATO as such basically started to think about conducting military operation via the approaches of denial. And that means being able to fight the war from the very beginning and not just the punishment. So we have time, we can mobilize, and then go there and fight Russians. So not like that, but from the very beginning, from the very first hour of the war. To be able to counter Russian units, right, and to impose the cost of an invader. It is not really worth to fight this war. So I mean, there are problems with trust, and actually, the German brigade is an excellent example, as it is stationed in a place where it is possible to effectively withdraw from its territory. It's actually only one such example. That decision was made. I mean, not, it wasn't very fortunate. That was during the period where German government was trying to have a like a normal sort of or quite friendly relation with Russia. Uh, Fortunately, now it's a past. These problems, I mean, remains. But it's also true that this problem is quite overstated. I mean, it's always been used by the U.S. administration as a form of test of the allies of how to react. And it was a lot of studies written about and so on and so on. So I'm not saying there aren't problem, but maybe it's not that significant than many think. So
That is the complex dilemma, as we have already discussed today, and it has like many dimensions of how do you implement your strategies, how do you develop them, what do you think is your adversary strategy. And we have like another very practical and particular situation with the same deterrence problem. We have the plans which people try to develop for Ukraine's security and for preventing the new Russian aggression against Ukraine after this war ends. We all try to do everything possible that it ends with Ukraine's victory, but the danger will not disappear. So now we are discussing what kind of bilateral security guarantees should be developed for Ukraine for the time before Ukraine will join NATO. What do you think is the basic challenge developing these strategies of bilateral security guarantees, and how plausible are they?
it's ultimately a matter of trust, as always with all security guarantees. It's a matter of um, um, under which condition and to which extent and how we are able to react and to defend Ukraine territory. Um, I mean, the problem is that, or problem, the crux of the issue is that it won't be made in vacuum. So it will largely depend on how the situation on battlefield evolved. I mean that. If Russia gains significant territorial gain, which I don't think is possible at the moment, but for this matter, if Russia gains some like significant territorial gain, it would be much harder to negotiate. Or if Ukraine army is treated to the like level when it's not really able to face another Russian attacks, then again the negotiations would be much more difficult. So my answer to that question is that Ukraine should really get as much military aid as possible to adjust its military position before there will be negotiations, and then we can talk about the actual guarantees and assurances for Ukraine. Because at the end of the day, Ukraine is at war in Russia. Of course, Russia invaded it, but yeah, I mean, every war is ended with a military, either military or with an agreement, and even military victory is signed by an agreement. So, and that requires the two sides. So, my answer is that it will largely depend on how the situation on battlefield evolves, and for that, it's desirable for actually the European security architecture. Ukraine to be able to regain as much territory as possible, to be as strong as possible.
So this is, of course, demonstrates once again that there is no such thing as a easy solution. Solutions must be complex, comprehensive, and include economic, political, military levels, and provide Ukraine with not only Ukraine but any of our allies with the means to defend themselves, and make it clear for the adversary that the answer on aggression will be a collective answer, which the aggressor would not like to have. Thank you so much. It was an interview with Matej Rafael Risko, who is a junior research fellow at the ADAPT Institute in Bratislava. Thank you so much, Matej.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
And don't forget to like, to share, and to subscribe to this channel so you will not miss the next interviews.